we are excited, both things, live and excited. So today we're going to be talking about how to pick a blockchain. I think sometimes people hear the word blockchain and think that all of the different types of, well, they either think there's one blockchain or they think that they all do the same thing. But that's not true. They're all built differently with very different goals in mind, or most of them are. So we're going to break down some of the chains today, talk about which blockchains we use, how we got into the space, and yeah, just go through, help you so you have information to be able to figure out what blockchain you would like to use if you're just starting, or maybe you're already in blockchain tech, but you'd like to learn more about the different chains. So hi, thanks for joining. I'm C4's Executive Director, Jessica Levesque, and we are joined by our Cryptocurrency Essentials Committee here. Thank you guys for joining. I'm excited to have this conversation. It's going to go wherever it goes. We've got an agenda here, but sometimes when we start talking about different blockchains, we get a little excited. So let's meet our CCE committee chair. Josh, do you want to start with intros?
Yeah, hi, Josh McIntyre. I am a software engineer by profession, currently at Microsoft, and I run Chain Toots, which is my free and open education project. So I teach people about computer science, crypto, cybersecurity, and all sorts of interesting techie topics.
Awesome. All right, Serena?
Hi, everyone. I'm Serena Charagunla. I'm a serial entrepreneur, a founder in the art space at the moment, and also got into the blockchain industry in about 2011. So I've been in it for quite a while. I also have experience as a product marketer and go-to-market strategy and have a marketing company in the emerging technology space.
Very nice. Kirk?
Hi, Kirk David Phillips. I'm a CPA is my background. So finance guy. I've been in the digital asset crypto space since 2014 and did a lot of consulting around tax and accounting, which I still do some of that, but more tangentially, and working on some exciting projects. And I'm looking forward to announcing and to help solve those issues in this space. But love everything about and also focused on education, crypto bullseye. But love everything about being in the digital asset space. It's a super exciting every day to wake up and see what's going on and have fun.
Yeah, certainly it's fun to see what's happening every day. It's always different. Carlos?
Hi, everyone. My name is Carlos Ivan Marino. I work in state government, but like a big passion project of mine is I am the executive director of the New Jersey Innovation and Technology Alliance, and our goal is to kind of educate residents of the state and also mom and pop shops, like large and small businesses, on how like blockchain works. And I've been in the space since about 2017, and it's been a fun ride up until this point. Yeah.
Definitely a ride. Fun. Fun one, but a ride. Okay, so most people start with one blockchain. Maybe you start using that blockchain because a friend of yours did, or just fell through the rabbit hole for a variety of different reasons. So we want to start by talking a little bit about how we each got into crypto in terms of which chains did we use first, which ones felt accessible to us, and why did we start using them. So Josh, do you want to, I guess, start with your initiation? Sounds like a cult. Which maybe some people think it is, but your initiation into the blockchain space.
Yeah, so I started around 2013 and 2014 when I was a computer science student. Um, as I was well along my journey of learning coding and technology, I really appreciated open source and sort of these security technologies, cryptography. So I got interested in Bitcoin because of those aspects, using cryptography for open money. And I did start with Bitcoin because that was the main thing at that time. And the use case that has interested me the most is sort of that day-to-day cash transactions. So as the space has evolved, as different blockchains have evolved, I got involved with the Bitcoin Cash community and Litecoin and many of these other sort of like on-chain scaling forks and blockchains that are out there. Um, and I know that's one of those areas of the community where there's a lot of sort of contention and strong opinions, which I actually think is great because there's so many options out there, and we're all free to choose what works for our use case. And so I love seeing how the community has evolved over the years.
Yeah, it is pretty cool to look at it from like in a retrospective way where we started individually and as a community. Serena, I think I probably should have called on you first because I think you've been in the crypto space the longest, right? 2011. Josh, when did you say you started to dabble with it?
Around 2013.
Okay. All right. So she beat you. Kirk, before or after 2011?
Oh, it's after 2011.
Okay. All right. Serena.
Well, I think
You
I
won.
came from a very biased perspective because when I initially got into it, there was only I went to the first Bitcoin conference. So, there was really no other option as a way to initially get in. But, even coming at it like at a younger age, I think it was really important to see like what people were initially using and kind of where like the masses were. So, initially started out with Bitcoin. And then at my previous startup, I was fortunate enough to work very much alongside a lot of the people that were integral to the Ethereum community because it was backed by Consensus Mesh. So I was with their R&D arm, and I was talking to all these startups that were building on Ethereum. And so it was really, I think I just became obsessed with the use cases of Ethereum and how a lot of it is so much more use case forward as opposed to, in a different sense, what chain people are choosing. It was more so about what the actual use case was. But I've kind of stuck with the main, Bitcoin and Ethereum. I've dabbled in other ones, but I think those two kind of have my heart.
Okay, cool. Love it. Kirk, you want to go?
Sure. So I'm always looking for like the next new thing and what to take on. I've got that kind of serial entrepreneur kind of DNA in my makeup. So yeah, so I first heard about Bitcoin in 2013. It was actually when I was taking a plane back to the East Coast, and I always grab a Wall Street Journal. And so it was that day happened to be the breaking news story about the Silk Road bust by the FBI. So that's where I first heard about Bitcoin. But then actually the very beginning of January, I think is when I started getting into it. Of course, obviously got into Bitcoin first, but at that time it's interesting how you talk about the 2011 because now fast forward a couple, 2, 3 years, and then there was some other projects that started to emerge. Next and bit shares and all other kinds of stuff like that. Like actually, many of these projects that were in the top 10 or top 20 on Coin Market Cap at the time, or they're not even around anymore. So, but anyway, nonetheless, whether I mean, Bitcoin is really your gateway, even like before Ethereum came around. If you wanted to get into any other coins or blockchains, you had to use Bitcoin. That was kind of your exchange mechanism. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of went far and wide and I guess it's just, I'm just so naturally curious about everything. I just kind of went far and wide and experimented with all kinds of stuff. Maybe too far and wide for a number of reasons, but,
Well, what's
and then of course got
interesting,
into Ethereum and played a lot there because we know that's a very large ecosystem as far as your Ethereum, EVMs, Ethereum virtual
yeah,
machines and so forth. So,
I find it interesting, Kirk, that you saw something about the Silk Road and that enticed you to be interested in this as someone who's, a tax guy, very into like doing things the right way. And
oh,
for
if
those
I
who are
can,
watching,
sorry, just a quick clarification. That, like, when I heard about that, I didn't take any action on it. I just kind of like filed it away. Like, I remember that, like, it was just like, oh, I
mm,
heard about it. It was actually like, I say Jan 1 because I don't remember the exact date, 2014.
yeah.
That's when I ran into a friend and they're like, hey, my husband and I want to spend $1,000 on a computer so we can mine some Bitcoin. Can you give us some advice on that? I
Okay,
didn't know anything about it. So I was like, I'll have to get back to you. But my highly skeptical mind was like, you don't know what you're talking about. So I actually
interesting.
then that's where I went down the rabbit hole. That single question like changed my entire life. I went down the rabbit hole and spent 2 years writing a book, not knowing anything about the ecosystem at all. So
Very cool.
yeah.
Well, so I just wanted, for anyone who's watching who isn't familiar with the Silk Road, so it was an online marketplace that launched in 2011 and it was on the dark web. And so because Bitcoin was used for it, it kind of started it was one of the big first, worldwide use cases for it. And it kind of took people down this is only used for drug money kind of path. And so for everyone who has learned about this, we know that that's not the case, but it definitely is something that kind of marred the Bitcoin name for quite a while. So, Carlos, I want to get to you as well. You want to talk to us a little bit, first chain you used, how you got into that, how you picked it, and then where you went from there.
Well, so the funny thing for me, excuse me, it wasn't for me, I got into it because of I was working on a political campaign. I had interns that were learning how a political campaign works. And then the second portion of their school year was going to be how does government work? And it was through that I was talking to them to pitch me an idea, tell me how to help them out. And the one thing that I noticed about what they had on the back of their laptops were the Bitcoin stickers. And this was around 2017. So I started asking them, what is that? They started explaining it to me. I spent the weekend just going down the rabbit hole. And after that, when I started like going more and more into that, we started focusing on how we could use blockchain and crypto. And on the side, I was doing my own type of research, looking at Bitcoin, looking at Ethereum. But my first token that I bought was XRP. And then after that, I started just jumping all over the place. I went from XRP then to a token called EOS, which is now Volta, it changed. And then I was going from Polkadot to Ethereum, then to Cosmos, and then I landed on ICP, the Internet Computer Protocol. So that's a lot of jumping around.
Well, I think that's pretty normal, because we don't know. First of all, many of us learn by doing, and if you're not using the different chains, you might not really have a full grasp of how they work and their purposes. So I do think that that is somewhat common. Many of us start with one, move to the next, or move back and forth, or we might even find that one chain is valuable and then it's no longer for what we're doing, but then later on it kind of circles back around. And then there are people that use multiple chains, and it just depends on what they're doing at the time to determine what. Like, so I'll use Bitcoin maybe for a peer-to-peer transaction, but then if I know the person wants to be able to sell it right away and doesn't worry about the fluctuations, I might use USDC on the Ethereum blockchain. So we really decide what we're using based upon what it is that what our goal is. But one of the interesting things with it is that there are so many. I should have asked AI to tell me how many chains there are currently, but if anyone knows, I mean, hundreds, maybe. It fluctuates, but so it's not like we're making it easy. It's not like you've got two choices, but actually I think that's what makes it so incredible, is that you have so many choices. But so let's talk a little bit about why we use different chains. So Josh, why don't you get us started on the currency route? So if we're just using it as currency, what are the different options? What are the chains? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different options, but kind of the main ones that I think of, well, number one, if you're a fan of Bitcoin and you like um, the development path of Bitcoin, there is the Lightning Network, which is a second layer scaling solution that helps with day-to-day payments. I just personally, as an engineer, I like kind of the simplicity and understanding that comes with a bit more on-chain scaling, we call it. So I like Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin for that reason. They're sort of designed to let more transactions through for a cheaper transaction fee for those day-to-day cash use cases. Um, and it sort of also depends on how many people are using it. Those chains I think are great, but they are a little bit less popular, which can also sort of help with the fees and things. So, to me, one of the neatest use cases is you can buy things with it. I've paid my cell phone bill with it. I've bought books with it. hosting and things for my technical projects. It is borderless and peer-to-peer. So I've even been paid for consulting by people that didn't tell me their real name to answer some security questions from somewhere else in the world. And they sent me, cryptocurrency payment. I think that's a really powerful use case that's also sort of very inclusive of people in different financial situations. But it's just one use case that I find interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of where, well, not kind of, it is where the whole thing started. Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency. It was the first blockchain. It's open, public, and it started because people wanted a different way to use the financial system in terms of not having that middleman, right? It was that first decentralized distributed model for sure. What other blockchains do we use for currency? What else have we got? Anyone want to jump in with another one? Maybe you personally or not, Kirk, or no, go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that for me, like I always, from experience, back in like 2023, 2024, my wife and I, we were living in Colombia, and in order to make payments and stuff, I would just do like Tron, USDT Tron. So it was very quick, very fast. When I needed just I would change some of my like crypto tokens into USDT Tron, and then I would send it to my wife. She would then, send it over into the currency over there in Colombia, and that's how we made payments from like rent to, just going out pretty much. So yeah.
Interesting. That's really cool. I always love
Yeah.
when people are actively using it. Go ahead, Kirk.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I mean, having been consulting for in this space since 2014, I was basically willing to accept practically anything that somebody wanted to pay, especially if it was a project that had their own native token, that's what they wanted to pay in. We'd accept that. But certainly accepting Bitcoin and ETH, that happened for a long, long time. Then probably shifted more into ETH and then eventually shifted into USDC. Because I think the stablecoin is the killer app because people don't really want to spend their BTC. I don't think. Not for everyday stuff,
Mhm.
more store value. And then you got the whole accounting thing and you know, selling ETH and you got to track it and have a gain or a loss on it and that kind of stuff. So it's like cool. It's just simpler using USDT. So it seems like a really common thing now. I think
It's
even
interesting.
more than the other stable coins, and especially on Ethereum too. That's the thing is you've got all these other layer two networks, Optimism and Arbitrum and all that kind of stuff, and if you have your USDC stable coins on parked in several places, you're kind of like creating your own thinned out liquidity. So I just out of habit and other things, I just kind of default to using Ethereum. I do experiment with the other ones, but it's more for experimentation.
Yeah.
I guess it's like you're personally fragmenting your liquidity, actually, I guess is what I find.
Mm.
If you spread
Yeah.
out your stable coins on these other networks.
Hmm. For
You
sure.
bringing up, you bringing up Kirk about wanting to save your Bitcoin reminded me of, I don't know if you all remember, but there were so many different articles that kept popping up of people that spent their Bitcoin on like pizza or on a coffee.
Yes,
And
coffee is a big one.
yeah, it's just
Hmm.
so funny.
Yeah, it's like
And of
an
course, all those
$80,000
people
cup of coffee.
exactly are just
I
kicking
mean, we got
themselves.
Bitcoin Pizza Day just around the corner,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
in a few
Couple
days.
weeks. Couple of weeks. So, I think one of the interesting things about this is that sometimes something starts like Bitcoin intended to be peer-to-peer currency for these fast transactions. And in some ways, it has shifted and changed, potentially not with the original intention that the founder or founders had. So it has moved from something that was more focused on payments to a lot of people don't want to spend it for exactly what Serena just said. Josh, did you want to jump in about that? I saw you on mute for a second.
Yeah, I think that's something that I actually really like about this space, and a point that is really helpful for folks when you think about choosing a blockchain. Part of it is not just choosing the blockchain based on sort of the tech that interests you. Like I'm an engineer, so I'm always looking at how it actually works. But part of it is also just finding your community. right? Um, Bitcoin has evolved a bit in terms of what most of the community likes to focus on. A lot of folks now see it more as a store of value, a hedge against inflation, kind of a speculative investment. Where will the value go? And so, what the technical side has focused on now in development is preserving that store of value use case, right? That decentralization. And so folks that are more interested in that cash use case, in some cases have shifted to other projects like Bitcoin Cash or Litecoin, or maybe they're working on the Lightning Network with Bitcoin. And so part of it is just find where your people are at. If you have a use case that interests you, do some research and figure out where people are sort of gathering and working on those types of things. That can help you find the path forward in the blockchain that you want to use.
Yeah, totally. I mean, finding people who are like-minded with what you're doing is a good way to also help learn what the differences are and hear from others in the community. Also, many of us belong to the cryptocurrency community as a whole, but then maybe we focus more on, one or two different blockchains or a bunch, and we consider ourselves parts of these mini communities as well, which I think is pretty cool. There are also those out there that maybe they call themselves like a Bitcoin maxi, which means that they see Bitcoin as the like one true blockchain and they have no interest in the others. And, that's their prerogative. And so people are able to choose what works for them. So we've talked a little bit about currencies. So, stable coins on Ethereum, Bitcoin, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash. There's many, but one of the things we did point out was many people use Bitcoin for long-term holding. This is not investment advice. I've also heard stories though of people holding on to tokens or crypto on other chains that they thought weren't worth holding on to, and then they kind of blew up. So that's, I guess, why it's called, why we say it's so speculative. Um, Serena, do you want to get us started on like what some of the different enterprise use cases are? Like you said, you use a lot of, Ethereum a lot. How is Ethereum used for or used in enterprises?
So Ethereum has a lot of flexibility in its use cases because of the ability to put smart contracts right on chain. So, different companies can kind of curate exactly what they want to do using the platform. And so, those use cases could be art, could be gaming. And actually, a lot of those things, we were talking about kind of like the different types of ways to get in, right? As investing or as currency or whatever it might be. But I think what's very unique about Ethereum is that it does it in these like particular niches. And so it meets the person kind of like where they're at. So if somebody's interested in art, then that's like the main thing that they're interested in. But then Ethereum has the underlying, technology that supports that. So I would say that Ethereum has a lot of use cases and it's a lot more flexible in terms of what you can do with it. And once you write the smart contract, it's all on chain. So it can just continue using it over and over again, depending on what the exchange is or what the transaction is as well.
Yeah, and that is an important piece of Ethereum using smart contracts. It allows you to create decentralized applications and to do a lot of things that some chains don't allow, which I think is why it expanded pretty quickly once people started to know what it was and how it worked. Kirk, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, that's a great point there. So I think that the way I also like to think about it is I like to call it program. We're in the age of programmable money because I think that, there's a lot of jargon that we use and some people might not get what what the meanings of this stuff is, especially if they're kind of newly exposed to it. So, but I like that terms. I think it's intriguing. If you don't know anything else, your first day in the digital asset space, like, oh, that's interesting. Programmable money. Yeah, it's okay. So that's the way I like to think about it. And that's what the smart contracts help you do. So it's really like whatever you could possibly create, it's like a blank canvas, whatever you want to come up with, which is why we got so many amazing decentralized finance protocols. And that's where DeFi, that term came from, is decentralized finance, because people have made up, essentially programmable money protocols where you can do all kinds of stuff. And I mean, there's really an infinite number of use cases around that. I mean, there's been we're many years down the road on that, but there's really, I mean, it's possible we're just beginning in what we are going to see as possible. So,
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, decentralized protocols we've seen so many different things, and smart contracts have really made a big difference in terms of how people are able to use cryptocurrency, how they're able to use blockchains in general. But so we've talked a little bit about, a lot of enterprises are using Ethereum or Solana. Solana is a big blockchain that's being used in the enterprise space, and in parts because it's not fully decentralized. So there's different scales of how centralized or decentralized different protocols are. And I think that that's one of like the cool things about blockchain is you get to choose which blockchain technology you want to participate in, which protocol. And if you have the ethos that having it be decentralized is important, that's where you're going to go. Or perhaps it depends on based on what you're doing. But so let's talk a little bit more about decentralized computing. Carlos, do you want to walk us through? You said at the beginning, at the top of the call, that you are passionate about ICP, Internet
Yes.
Computer Protocol, which
Yeah.
is something that personally I'm not very familiar with. And so it's just interesting that I could be in this space for so long. And I actually think you may be the first person I even heard talk about this protocol. So why don't you walk us through how you got into it, what you think is important about it?
So when I got involved in ICP, it was because I was trying to learn how to code, and I saw that there was like this there was like I'm trying to think of what the name of the course is right now, but anyway, it was this it was split up into different chapters, and towards the very end it said, build on the Internet Computer Protocol, and I was just like, build on the internet. And I said, let me go look into this. So I looked into it, and the way that they talked about it was like uh when you take a look at blockchain and all that type of stuff, they say that you can look at Amazon Web Services, you can look at Google Cloud, you can look at I'm trying to think of other, like data centers and stuff. But anyway, what they're trying to say here is like, okay, Internet Computer, what we are is that we can host, an entire application, the front end, the back end, the database, the whole stack would entirely be served to you on chain straight from like over your browser through HTTPS, and you don't have to worry about AWS. You don't have to worry about the middleware. No bridging. It's just code and state running, and it's on a decentralized network. When I saw that, I was like, whoa, okay. I started getting more involved. I even went to like a community conference that was held in like Miami. After that, just getting connected with people on like X, on Discord, and just being part of the community, which was, I would tell you, phenomenal, like really good community. Anytime I had a question, I could just ask and somebody would answer. So for me, like what made me like kind of go right to ICP was just the idea of something being like decentralized. Because when you look at Solana or some other of these other like blockchains, they're housed on, like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure. But when you take a look at ICP, it's like independent node providers, and they're scattered throughout the globe. And that's what kind of got me going, and that's what like really got me excited about it. So
Yeah. Well, it's just interesting to think about all of these different applications we've already talked about, and like to just throw over to another one. You're talking about AWS and maybe start thinking, things being data being stored in the cloud, but there are also blockchains designed for decentralized file storage, like Filecoin. Josh, do you want to explain Filecoin real quick? Because this is just another way that blockchain tech is being used.
I admittedly don't know much about how it works, outside of sort of being familiar with the general concept. But the idea is instead of the internet really is just a bunch of different file shares in a sense. I mean, sometimes you visit a website and there's actually application code running on a server. And many times you go to something like a static website where it's just sort of a server giving you over HTML, CSS, JavaScript files that are displayed in your browser. And those are often hosted through cloud providers like GCP, AWS, Azure. And my understanding of things like Filecoin is it's just sort of putting instances of these files that you want to share on different nodes throughout the network, just like the blockchain is used to store transaction data, and then you can request that data. But don't
Yeah.
quote me on it necessarily. There's probably some good resources out there that know it better than I do.
Well, I actually think this is such a good point. Josh, you have been immersed in cryptocurrency blockchain technology for over 10 years now. And there are so many different blockchains that even if you've been doing this for a really long time, no one, well, maybe there's somebody out there. Most people, if you're just like, hey, tell me about this, we can't possibly know about every single blockchain and every protocol and everything that's happening on all of them, which shows how diverse this ecosystem is. But it also shows, I think, how it can be really difficult to figure out where to start, how to get into this, because you might say, okay, I'm not sure I want to, it's like, oh, do you want to store files? Whoa, like where do I go? Where do I go from here? So I think the fact that you aren't as familiar with this is a really good lesson for all of us, that none of us know everything about every blockchain. And if we did, you probably wouldn't have a life at all. I don't even think that'd be possible to know it all. But that is another one that's used. So we've talked about Filecoin, Solana, Ethereum, Bitcoin, ICP. We talked about Polygon yet? Should we explain how Polygon works and connects to Ethereum? Serena, did you want to get into that, or did you want to take us in a different direction related to what I was just saying, which is also fun?
I could do both. I was just going to say that we, in our last live stream, I think we talked a lot about kind of how, everybody in the space is just learning. And so, Josh, I think you brought up a great point in saying that you weren't super familiar. And honestly, I wasn't. I'm not either. So I think it's really important to know that everybody is kind of in that way in the space, and everyone, you kind of know what you know and you don't know what you don't know. So every conference that you're attending, there are so many people that have no idea what they're walking into every time they explore like a different booth or a different talk. And I think people's perception of how much people in the space know, and they just kind of forget that it's constantly changing. And so, Jessica, to your point, nobody can know everything. And then, okay, so we can tie it back to Polygon. So Polygon runs as a layer 2 on Ethereum. And so essentially what this allows Polygon to do is run their transactions in a separate place that makes it more scalable and more affordable. So I guess you can kind of think of it as Ethereum has very high gas prices. And so that's all because people are competing for that same, the word is escaping me right now, but for that same block and that same, spot to complete that transaction or to complete whatever that thing that they're doing is. But what Polygon does is kind of eliminate that traffic and, shift it somewhere else based on the use case. So, it's still running with the Ethereum ecosystem, but it is not running and competing with the same blocks that people directly on Ethereum are using.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I don't know, I was going to add to that, but I kind of feel like that summed it up pretty well. It's a second layer scaling solution because of the gas fees that people have complained about. And actually, one thing I wanted to say that I was thinking about earlier when we were all talking about our how we got into this. And I was familiar with Bitcoin for years. And then what got me really interested in Ethereum was when CryptoKitties came around. I'm not sure if you guys remember this. This was like in 2017. But that's when I first got really excited about it, because I thought this is so cool. There's artwork on this chain. This is really neat. And then if you're familiar with historical information here, what happened was it really, really slowed down the Ethereum network. It increased gas fees. It ended up being hugely problematic. And so with that kind of thing and others, scaling solutions popped up as a way to make transactions less expensive and take less time, which is kind of where I think the majority of scaling solutions come from, and why when you talk about something like Polygon or one of the other second layer protocols and having it also go back and use Ethereum, I think that gets kind of confusing sometimes because they're interacting with each other, but it's also a really neat way that the cryptocurrency digital asset space has moved things forward and scaled in a way that accommodates needs for all different kinds of people. All right. Sorry, that was like a little quick rant about how I loved CryptoKitties. So let's get into, actually, let's talk about some more fun things. Like, what other things that are happening on blockchains that we've all experienced that are interesting, fun, got our attention, maybe kept it? What other chains do we think are cool for anything? Gaming? Go ahead, Kirk.
Yeah, I forgot to mention earlier, so I guess it's a good time to slot it in now. So I've spent a lot of time in the Cosmos ecosystem, even from the early days, and from the ICO all the way up, all the way through. So I just love the way it works. Just from a user experience, it's like, the whole idea was it to be the kind of like the internet of blockchains. And they have the ICB protocol. I think I'm saying that correctly. Or the IBP, Internet Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol. I think I'm making it. You get what I'm saying. I may be mixing up the
Yeah, we're with
acronym,
you.
but nonetheless, Polkadot was attempting to achieve the same thing, albeit through a different technology, a different approach. But so I've used Polkadot some, but I just like the Cosmos ecosystem just because it like worked. It's like when you use it, you're like, wow, that is amazing. It would be like the equivalent of sending Bitcoin to Ethereum, and forget about the fact I know there's all kinds of uh, development being done where you can do that stuff. But I mean, you're literally sending from one chain to the like atomically, essentially. Like send Bitcoin to Ethereum or any coin from any native token from any chain to any other chain. That's kind of what it feels like. But it's because all these other chains that are connected to the Cosmos Hub, they're using the same language. So that's why they can do that. So just from a user
Yeah.
perspective, it's like, wow, the experience of it's like, this is amazing. And I don't really know that many people that actually use it. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a lot of liquidity there. So therefore, not a lot of activity now. However, I still hear projects coming up saying, "Oh yeah, we just developed something," or it's a Cosmos chain.
Mhm. Well, one of our co-founders of C4 is actually building a blockchain-based game on Cosmos, and it's really cool what he's doing with it. But he wrote an interesting article about why he chose Cosmos, because he went through many, many different blockchains before he decided that Cosmos was the right one. I should find that article and put it in the YouTube, but it's just really interesting to think he uses other chains, likes other chains, but for his project, for this game that he's building, Cosmos makes the most sense. And that kind of, I think, just puts it all together in perspective that what you are using so depends on what your needs are. And sometimes, though, you walk in, you know what your needs are, and you're looking for the chain that meets those. That's one way to do it. Other times, you walk in and you experience, okay, here's an example of a blockchain. I'm going to play around with it. I don't really know what my needs are yet. I've just heard about this technology and I want to be a part of it and I want to experience it. And that's okay too. In fact, I think both of them are a pretty cool way to approach it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's actually a really good point, Jessica. That I think from a developer perspective, especially, that's maybe the best example of where somebody's, or a team is trying to solve something, create something, and they're like, okay, we need to do this. Now, where is there an existing chain that's going to help us achieve this in the best, optimal, most efficient way for the technology and also for the user experience? So it's even more so and that's a perfect use case study, like you said, that, oh, look, we looked around, we bounced around, tested all these different chains out or investigated them or whatever it was, and we landed on Cosmos because we think that's the best fit. And
Yeah.
obviously, it could be another story for somebody else from
Yeah,
based on their
exactly.
project.
Exactly. Go ahead, Serena.
Well, I also just wanted to talk about, just the content creator economy as well. And like within relation to blockchain, I think smart contracts have done a really great job of, in our last live stream, we talked a lot about trust and how, blockchain is trustless, and just kind of like, removes the middleman a lot of the time. And I think smart contracts do a great job of kind of explaining how that works in a very, intuitive way. So, for example, in music and art, there's typically, well, at least for music, there's typically royalties. And a prior startup that I was working on, we were working on royalties for artists as well. And so, when a transaction is made, typically with music, the artist, will eventually get the cut. However, between that initial purchase and to the artist, it goes through several different companies, which, it has to go through all of their processing. They have to figure out how much money they take, what their cut is. Then it goes to the next place. They figure out their cut. Then it eventually gets sent to the artist. And, they may receive that money in various ways. It could be a check, it could be a direct deposit, whatever it might be. But what a smart contract could do in that use case is, if it's all set up and coded in, then because it's on chain, the music is purchased and it immediately will go to exactly who it's supposed to go to. So it fully cuts out the middleman, removes a lot of the processing power. And because of that, it streamlines the whole process. And there's also a trail. So the artist can directly see what music was purchased, how much they got as a result of it. And there's a lot less disputes. And so I just really wanted to bring that up because I think it's such a great example of smart contracts and such a great use case, specifically in the content economy.
Yeah, that was so good. And also made me think of someone that Serena and I are both friendly with is building doing stuff with telecoms on chain and settlement and trying to use that to make the process more transparent and faster. It's called Interweave. It's really cool what they're doing, but it just shows there are so many different ways to use blockchain technology. You're talking about music royalties, and then we're talking about telecoms, and we're talking about sending money back and forth to family members or just within yourself to be able to do payments like Carlos was talking about. There's just so many different options for this, which I think makes it both accessible and difficult because where do you start? But I think one of the things for those who are less technical might be talking about like ease of use. Josh, do you want to talk a little bit about like how do we decide what makes the most sense for us and what chains are potentially easier to get started with versus more difficult, or just anything about difficulty and ease of use?
Yeah, I kind of want to tie in security as well because I think that's something that often actually goes hand in hand with ease of use. Um, I think one of the things that we all clearly love about the space is the huge variety of different chains that are available. Um, but in some sense, the popularity contest does help as far as usability and security. Chains that are a bit more popular tend to have a bigger ecosystem of the actual tech that you use to interact with the chain. So think of things like mobile wallets, exchanges that have a good reputation, hardware wallets, those kind of different things that will actually allow you to interact with the blockchain, on board and off board, keep your coins secure long term. Those are all important things to take into consideration. Um, so, especially when it comes to security too, more popular doesn't necessarily mean more secure, but a broader user base, a higher reputation to uphold, more eyes looking at open source protocols and open source wallets does tend to help as far as security goes, um, as a generalization. So those are things to keep in mind as well when you're making those decisions. Sometimes a chain that has 100 users might be really cool and emerging, but I just think that you should be aware that if you're putting money into that, you probably have a higher risk profile than you do using wallets for Bitcoin that have been around for 10 years. It's just unfortunately the nature of security.
Yeah, and deciding how to store any of this. There's so many different security pieces that come into play as well. Yeah, for sure. And what is easiest for each person, what makes the most sense is going to obviously differ greatly. If you have less of a technical background, you may want to start small. You may want to start with something that there's a lot of different videos on how to use. There's a lot of people out there that can give different examples. One thing I would say that can be problematic, and I don't think this is just in cryptocurrency, this is across, all, well, pretty much global. Marketing can be great, but at the same time, it is very easy to be kind of bamboozled by what looks really fun and colorful and what has the best marketing. And sometimes things that are really secure, well done, whatnot, have great marketing. But then there's also when there's really good marketing and the underlying protocol or app or whatnot is not actually secure, because rather than spending the time on security and paying engineers, it's been on the glitter and gold. So I always think to be very aware of that. In particular, if you're an artist, or if you like things that you find visually appealing, just be aware that this is something that can sway us in a way that we should just be aware of. I'm not saying it's a bad thing always, but it is something to just notice and to make sure that you're choosing something based upon what will work for you, not just what looks cool in the moment. So, all right. Who here can remember the first time that you off-ramped cryptocurrency onto, oh, sorry, Josh, were you going to jump in about something before I moved on?
Oh, I mean, I had one point as well, because I think it's
Please.
always fun to sort of advocate, against your own biases. Like personally, I'm not a maximalist for any chain. I'm just the type of person that wants to have 50 hobbies instead of one. But that is something that can help you as far as security and ease of use. Like if you find a community you really like and you only focus on that, um, that does mean all your focus is going into one place, and so you can sort of excel at that. Like, I know some of our colleagues at C4, tend to focus maybe only on Bitcoin, working on security projects, and that allows them to pour all of their expertise into making the most secure Bitcoin wallet or, Bitcoin tool that they can. So, there is an advantage to that sometimes. I mean, even though it's not for me, I get it, right? It just lowers your attack surface, and it also just sort of lowers your overall mental burden of learning how to use something in this space where there's just so much going on.
That's such a good point. Anybody else have thoughts on that? I sort of jumped the gun moving on to the next one. Kirk, I can see you're
Oh,
ready to jump
yeah.
into.
Chomping at the bit. Well, I think just ease of use. I may not be the best one to ask on that, but I feel like because I don't actually, I guess maybe it's because I've been doing it so long, right? I just don't buy the narrative that it's everything's there may be some clunkiness and obviously there could be a better user experience. I just don't buy the whole narrative. We got to like dumb it down so far because it's such a burden. It's like, oh, the technology is so bad. We got to dumb it down and make it so that Web 2 people can just do this with ease with the least amount of effort. I just don't buy that argument, but nonetheless, I just feel like kind of once you figure out a wallet, a self-custody wallet, whether it's a let's just call it a browser wallet, browser plugin. Like, I think once you've kind of mastered one, you kind of get the idea for the other ones, even though they're a little different. So once you figure one out, you've kind of mastered your own ease of use case and stuff like that. But anyway, I think you wanted to talk about the onboarding or off-ramping, I
Mhm.
think. I
Yeah, well,
remember
that's actually a perfect segue.
So I don't remember off-ramping other than I know I've had a Coinbase account for a long time. They were one of the first ones, and have typically had the best maybe onboarding, but even offboarding, I think, is better for off ramps. But I do remember like I remember my onboarding story more than the off ramp, which is that in the early days, even in 2014, I was like, where can you buy Bitcoin with a credit card? I was trying to always dig and crawl around and figure out where can you do that? Where can you do that? I remember there was this one site called CoinMX that only lasted for a couple of years. And I don't know, they claimed they were like a trading card thing. I think it was like a mask, a cover for like banking issues because they couldn't say what they really did. I think they made up that it was like had shifted from some other thing. But I was like, yeah, I want to be able to figure out how you can just, buy with a credit card or a debit card and make it easy to get in. So I remember that more than the trying to get out. But that is a challenge. And so seeing this from someone else's perspective, can think about people that I know that their stories about how they've recently gotten into the ecosystem, right? So they kind of gotten exposed to the whole thing. I set up my Coinbase account. I got my self-custody wallets. I got the whole thing. So they you fund their Coinbase account or just do a direct buy, that kind of thing. And then they want to, off ramp and stuff like that, right? So whether it's the front end of it or the back coming on or going out, the thing is like, well, I don't understand this thing. It's still taking like it might take 2, 3, 4 days on the back end. Well, it's like, all right, hold on, you got to understand here that you're bolting two financial systems together. This new programmable money system that's amazing and awesome that you can do all kinds of amazing things with. And then the clunky old TradFi banking system that's been the same way that it's been for decades, if not, centuries. So just because, so crypto doesn't transform banking, like it's still banking. They're still plugged together in some way. So you might still have that legacy, ACH, whatever clearing time that you got to wait for 2, 3, 4 days or whatever it is. So it's like that's
Mhm.
one thing I see people get tripped up, collapsing the two, thinking that I don't understand this crypto thing, but no, it's actually the banking piece of it that still is what
Yeah.
it is and still does what it does. So,
Yeah,
but
that's a
you
good
can,
point.
yeah, but you can actually, I mean, I got a design now that if you, I think some of it has to do with if you're a seasoned Coinbase user, and plus if you also, sometimes if you have some assets on there, I mean, you could deposit assets and send out, but if you have some assets on there, it'll cover this thing where you know, they want you to have the hold period, right? So basically, I got it designed. I know that, it's like, all right, I might need some funds, like, in a couple of days, or I might wake up on a Monday morning and need funds, and I know that I can just go grab crypto from somewhere, send it into Coinbase, sell it, and have it in the bank account by the time the afternoon rolls around. Maybe even as late as like 11 o'clock in the day, and then
Yeah.
still have it
One
in the
of the
bank account.
things I wanted to get at that you started talking about a little bit, Kirk, is in terms of like the different on and off ramp options. Like you were talking about Coinbase, there are so many, and I think one of the cool things is 10 years ago, using one of these exchanges was a lot more clunky and it did look a lot different than traditional finance. And now I think that a lot of these centralized exchanges look more like a banking app and they make it a lot easier to figure out. There's now warnings, rather like when you send something to an address there, they'll say, are you, make sure you're sending this on the right chain, or they've got things in the background running where they can say like, looks like this isn't a valid address. But 10 years ago that wasn't really the case. Setting up KYC, all of these things was really a challenge. So in some ways, the crypto industry, I think, has really grown and taken some notes from the UX of TradFi to make it easier. We don't have time to really get into like bridging and swapping, but I think that's where it becomes a lot more technical, not even technical, more challenging. You have to kind of practice doing this more because it's not as, I think, intuitive for people that are used to traditional finance, because that is now set up in a way that looks really similar. We only have a few minutes left. So, Carlos, I wanted to ask you, you talked a little bit about how when you were in, did you say Colombia? Is that where you were?
Yes, I was in Colombia.
And you were sending back and forth. What was that like? And is that different now, or would it be different because technology, I mean, the tech has already grown and changed since then, right?
Well, I mean, what I could say is, I mean, I haven't done that since 24, but at
Mm-hmm.
that moment, it was like, I would say I couldn't open up a bank account over in Colombia because I'm not a Colombian citizen. I'm an American citizen, but my wife, she's Colombian. So she opened up an account with a company that's still around. They only do stuff in Mexico, Colombia, Brazil. But yeah, like the whole process, it was so quick. It was literally like I would go from like let's say my Kraken account or my cold storage wallet. I would just send it over to her. She would then transfer it over into her Colombian pesos, and it was in her bank account within minutes. And it was amazing how quick it was. And I'm gonna say maybe it's a lot quicker now because it was really smooth, and I never really had a problem. But I just thought it was very convenient. And over there, their rules. This was back in 2024. The rules for them when it comes to crypto, they were they're not highly regulated, but it was just like they did accept it. So there was no real issue. You just had to do KYC and AML type of paperwork before you sign on to off-ramp money.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we are actually almost at the end. We wanted to talk a little bit about adoption and popularity. Josh, do you want to give us like a quick rundown of what you maybe think on that to close us out? How do we look at the adoption of these different chains and popularity in terms of how we pick a blockchain?
I think it can help in a way, but you also have to be skeptical of sort of the popularity contest. I think that there have been a lot of chains that have had hype around them where people have dumped a lot of money in that sort of disappeared or evaporated because they didn't necessarily have a real use case or they didn't work as well as advertised. I'm a little bit biased because I'm a technical person by nature and I love getting into the sort of the code and the technical aspects. Um, but I think for everyone, I like to kind of cut through the marketing and the hype and just look and see what does it actually do and how does it work. Um, if I could sit down in a couple sessions or a couple searches and clearly understand what the use case is for a blockchain, why it's different, roughly how it works. I'm not saying you have to be a programmer. Um, I'm more likely to want to use it, right? If I go to the website and I see a lot of marketing fluff, but very few details on how it actually works, or sort of a black box algorithm that I can't actually look at, that just makes me personally quite skeptical, and I'm less likely to use it. So I think there's sort of a difference between, to your point, popularity for valid reasons and a strong community versus popularity because of hype.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Something to definitely be aware of. Serena, one last thing on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say most, chains and companies have white papers as well. And I love reading those. So I would say, like, Josh, to your point at looking at the technology, even for somebody who isn't as technical, you can take those white papers, literally put them into AI, and it will give you a breakdown of what it means. So you don't need to be able to understand everything, but it's a great starting place that, really explains things clearly as to how they work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are running over, but I want to thank everyone for joining. Thank you to our CCE committee. And hopefully this helped make the blockchain technology landscape, as vast as it is, seem a little bit less overwhelming. One of the things to point out is there isn't just one best blockchain. It really depends on what it is that you're trying to use that blockchain for. So we've got different tools, different priorities, there are trade-offs, and basically do some research on it. And we gave you guys some tips on what to look for when you're deciding what blockchain to use, but also don't pigeonhole yourself. Try one, experiment, go around, see what works for you. And you may find that one thing is the best, or you may find a bunch, or you might change your mind 5-10 years in, who knows. The exciting thing about this is that there are so many different opportunities to learn and grow. And I think that's kind of why we all love this technology so much. So I want to thank you guys for joining, everyone who's watching. And until next time, we will have another follow-up live stream at some point. But thank you all. We appreciate you being here. Thank you. You guys can say goodbye. It's okay.
Oh, thank you.
I need to cut you off.
Thanks. I thought it was awesome.
All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Bye.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great. We'll see you.
Right.
All right. Very cool. Oh.